Today on Facing Life Head On.
Then sometimes the babies were alive when they were born.
So what'd you do then?
You just left them to die. A lot of times we, would leave the room and, leave it in charge of the nurse who would, we weren't there a lot of times to see what happened.
This week we sat down with two former abortionists who are speaking out about the profession they say left an emotional scar on them and the women they treated.
When I had graduated from medical college and when I was in my residency training program in the late 70s, if you asked me just generically or politically, what I thought about the issue, I would not have hesitated to say, look, I'm pro-choice. This was a decision between a woman or a doctor, and no one else, including the baby's dad, had anything to say about it. It's one thing, a lot of people identify themselves one way or the other, but when you're an obstetrician gynecologist and you say that, then you have to decide whether you're going to actually do abortions or not. So as part of my training, I didn't have to learn to do abortions, but I did. And right along with learning how to do deliveries and hysterectomies and everything else that obstetrician gynecologists do, I learned to do abortions.
Noreen Johnson had moved from Trinidad and Tobago to study medicine in the United States. Learning to do abortions was part of the curriculum.
It was part of the routine training for residents in the program that I attended. So it was really not presented as a choice. When I first started residency, although I do remember that there was one student resident who, when we were told to go down to the abortion room down the hall, actually, interestingly, from the neonatal intensive care, it's quite a paradox how these things can happen on the same floor, almost side by side, but I remember my fellow residents saying, you all can go on down the hall and kill those babies, I'm not going to do that. But at that time, it really didn't have an impact on me. I thought she was just different. And so I went down the hall with my resident to perform first trimester and later second trimester abortions.
How many abortions were you asked to perform during your residency?
Typically, we did abortions 1 day a week, and it would average about 6 to 8 first trimester abortions and probably about 4 to 6 second trimester.
You understand what the baby looks like at any stage of pregnancy. How did you persuade yourself that pulling these children apart in the womb is an ethical thing to do as a doctor?
Of course a doctor knows fetal development. And not only that, if you didn't, you'd be reminded of it every time you do an abortion. When you do an abortion, whether it's a suction abortion where all the contents are pulled into the suction machine in a container, or much more graphically, when you're doing a second trimester abortion, literally pulling a baby to pieces, when it's over, you have to go through the material that you obtained. You go through that suction bottle inside the machine, or you literally look at the parts that you pulled out and you almost literally reassemble the baby. You have to take inventory. You have to make sure you got 2 arms and 2 legs and all the pieces. Because if you leave anything behind, your patient's going to come back infected, bleeding, or worse. On the other hand, when you're pro-choice, you have this mindset that says, well, I'm here to help my patient. But you're not thinking of that baby as a patient at all. You're completely ignoring that aspect of it. Your patient is that young lady. And you're going to help her get through college, or not be a single mom, or complete her, whatever it is, whatever her reasoning is, and whatever's motivating her to come there, you're there to help.
How far into pregnancy would you say was your latest abortion?
Probably about 22 weeks, thereabouts. Those abortions that were past 16 weeks during training were done by prostaglandin infusion into the uterus or saline infusion. Now, there's a big drawback with those types of abortions because occasionally you could end up with a live birth, and because those babies were delivered by quote-unquote natural means, through the vagina. They were expelled by contractions of the uterus, and sometimes the babies were alive when they were born.
So what'd you do then?
You just left them to die. A lot of times we, would leave the room and, leave it in charge of the nurse who would, we weren't there a lot of times to see what happened.
For people to get an idea how big we're talking about, if you literally look at your hand, the width of your hand from the tip of your finger down to your wrist, that's a 20-week baby, about that big, not counting the legs. That's head to rump, which is the way we measure them. If you turn your hand on its side, the width of your hand is about 12 weeks. That's about how big they are at 12 weeks. And so when you're talking 24 weeks, now you're talking a hand and a half. Even bigger. These kids, as I said, these are fully formed children. There's no blob of cells involved here. These are, as I said, every abortionist knows that.
When we come back, reality sets in.
But for the first time in my life, I didn't see how somehow I was a great doctor helping out my patients, and I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't even see the $600 cash I just made in 15 minutes. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter.
Thank you for inviting us into your home. Each week we feature real people who deal with real-life issues head-on. Some of their experiences are uplifting, while others will break your heart. But in the end, the message is clear. Those who follow biblical principles on the issues of life are blessed. Become a partner with us in providing a positive, life-affirming message to help change the way the next generation values innocent human life. Please consider a generous gift to help offset the costs of producing this important quality programming. You can donate on our secure website at facinglife.tv or by calling the phone number on your screen during normal business hours. Together, we can make a real difference for life.
This week, we met two former abortionists speaking out about the hundreds of abortions they performed and what it was that made them pro-life. What went through your mind as you performed abortions?
I think what happens is that after the first one, there is a significant amount of desensitization that occurs. That makes it easier for you to see the second one. And then there's this warped sense of fascination and intrigue and power and accomplishment because there are so few people who are doing abortions. So you were doing something that other people were not able, didn't have the skill to do. So, you completely dehumanize the fetus. And although all your good medical training and knowledge tells you that this is a preborn human being, somehow you start seeing it completely differently. All of a sudden, products of conception, seems to be a much more acceptable term rather than, destruction of human life. And we get to the point where we actually rationalize that what we're doing is promoting women's health, being a woman's advocate for choice. That makes it so acceptable for us to continue doing the procedure. But then you have to go home at night and deal with the reality of what you've done during the day.
For Tony and Seal Lavatino, that reality was becoming harder to bear as they struggled with infertility.
When I was going through the infertility workup, I can remember so vividly coming home and locking myself in the bathroom and just sobbing my eyes out And there were two ironies that were not lost on me. One, here I am married to an OBGYN and I can't get pregnant. The other was, here I am trying to get pregnant and my husband is killing babies.
I remember very distinctly doing, my D&C abortions one morning and literally looking down and saying, gosh, I'm throwing these kids in the garbage. Wouldn't even one of these mothers allow us to take her child home to love and care, for our own? But of course it doesn't work that way. So that was the first time I really had any doubts. They said they were strictly selfish, but very definitely it was a real disconnect between killing babies in the morning and then trying to find one more number to call to see if we could find a baby of our own in the evenings.
In August of 1978, baby Heather was adopted. Shortly after, Seal became pregnant with the couple's son, Sean.
Things were good until June 23rd of 1984. And Tony was on call that day and had made rounds, and it was quiet, so he was home. We had taken the kids to a local park and had come home and had dinner, and we had friends coming over for dessert and coffee that night. And at 7:25, we heard the screech of brakes out in front of our house. The kids had been playing in the backyard and had wandered out front, and Heather had been hit by a car.
How old was she?
She was 5. She had just finished kindergarten.
What kind of emotions did you experience, Doctor, when you were dealing with the death of your child and how it related to your abortion practice?
The word devastated doesn't even come close to how you feel. But what do you do after a disaster? You take a couple of weeks off and then you try to get back into your life. And after going back to practice a couple of weeks later, and I don't remember, and see at the time my partner and I were doing second trimester D&E abortions. These are relatively few physicians did them. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, a D&E second trimester abortion is literally tearing a baby to pieces. And I don't remember when that first D&E abortion was scheduled after her death, but I showed up at OR number 9 at Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York, where we worked, like I had countless times before. And this is routine. This was routine to me at this point. I wasn't even thinking of it as something special. Obviously, I had a lot of other things on my mind. One of the instruments that you use during that procedure is called a Sofer clamp. Basically, it's a clamp that's used to literally dismember or rip these babies apart. And I remember putting that clamp inside the uterus and pulling like you always have to be able to get pieces out, and out came an arm or a leg. And I remember just staring at it in the clamp. And I just froze for a second. This just absolutely made me sick. And this is something, as I said, that was routine to me. Sick or not, well, as I said earlier, once you start an abortion, you can't stop. You've got to get all the pieces. And I know it sounds strange to people, but it was absolutely true. After going through the second trimester abortion soon after her death and looking down at this pile of goo on the table that used to be somebody's son or daughter, that was just major crisis time for me. We used to make $600 to $700 cash to do a second trimester D&E abortion. And it was 15 minutes to actually do the procedure. That's a lot of money in 15 minutes. But for the first time in my life, I didn't see how somehow I was a great doctor helping out my patients, and I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't even see the $600 cash I just made in 15 minutes. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And it occurred to me that, this lady had come to me, not literally, no patient has ever said this or ever will, but this lady really did come to me and said, here's $600 cash, kill my baby. And I was the kind of person that would look right back at her and say, why, sure, I'll do that, no problem. This was a crisis with a capital C.
When we return, the doctors face the future.
When you understand that killing a baby this big for money is wrong, it doesn't take you too long to figure out that it doesn't matter if the baby is this big or this big or this big or maybe even just this big. It's all the same.
Whether you're a student needing answers, a parent needing help, or a concerned citizen wanting to make a difference, Life Issues Institute has the resources you need to put your values into action. Life Issues Institute is an international educational organization committed to protecting innocent human life. Life Issues Institute knows what it takes. That's why millions throughout the world turn here for help. Life Issues Institute has authored more pro-life publications than any other entity in the world, and its materials are printed in over 30 languages. Radio broadcasts, newsletters, and a website filled to the brim with the answers you're looking for are just a click away. Go to facinglife.tv and click on the link to Life Issues Institute to find out more about how you can change the heart of a nation.
Shortly after moving to College Station, Texas, Dr. Noreen Johnson, an experienced abortionist, began to see her profession for what it was.
One of my colleagues said to me, "So, Dr. Johnson, are you planning to do abortions?" Now, I had no idea of how conservative this town was. I thought I was bringing into town a service that was lacking. So I proudly answered, "Oh, yes." And he kind of looked at me and he said, "You know, if I were you, I would go on tread on that ground very carefully." He said, "You don't want to be known as the town abortionist." Those words stuck with me, so I decided, okay, I could continue to do abortions, but I'll do them very clandestinely. I wouldn't publicize the fact that I did abortions, but in a small town, the word gets around. And so I stopped. I certainly didn't want to be branded in that regard and have reason to be ostracized from a society that I had worked so hard to be accepted into.
For Tony Levatino, the death of his 5-year-old daughter had brought the value of life to the forefront of his mind.
As Seal would say, she always knew when I had an abortion scheduled the next day because I was just absolutely miserable to be around. And I'd gotten into a blame game. It was the girl's fault for getting pregnant, and it was the hospital's fault for allowing them, it was the nurse's fault for scheduling them, it was everybody's fault but my own. And between the loss of our daughter and what was the way we were not together and all of this, she literally packed a bag one night and was ready to go.
I was taking our son and I was leaving. And I just looked at him and I said, it's not the girl's fault, and it's not the hospital's fault, and it's not the nurse's fault. It's your fault. If this is causing you so much pain, why don't you just quit?
And what was your response to that?
My response to that was the next day to go back to my partners and tell them that I would no longer do second trimester D&E abortions. I said because there were so few physicians willing to do them, it was really just up to 4 physicians in my group, only 2 of us were doing these late-term abortions. And I went back and announced that I just couldn't do this anymore, it was too stressful. But hard-headed, I was going to do the first trimester abortions, the little ones that we do in the office. And I soldiered on with that a few more months. But, when you've made that kind of transition, when you understand that killing a baby this big for money is wrong, it doesn't take you too long to figure out that it doesn't matter if the baby is this big or this big or this big or maybe even just this big. It's all the same. And it was February of 1985. I'm ashamed to say it was that long after her death, but that I went back to my partners a second time, and I told them I would no longer do abortions, and I haven't.
Has it been a burden for you at times to contemplate what you've been involved with?
It has. It's a part of my life that is still filled with regret. A part of my life that, I could never make up for. How can you make up for lives that you have taken? There's absolutely no way that you could make up for that. I had to go through a process of healing myself. You can know that God's forgiven you, and thank God for that. But yet, in your heart, you have to come to grips with the gravity of what you've done, and you have to reverse that process of dehumanization, desensitization that you had undergone to bring yourself back to that person that you were, before you got involved in doing that type of work.
How do you make up for killing somebody? I mean, how do you make up for that? We run into this. I mean, I know I went through it. I know that and we see it all the time, and the pro boards always talk about, well, what are you talking about post-abortion stress? All we ever see in our patients' faces is relief. And they're absolutely right. They are absolutely right. As an abortionist, the first emotion I ever saw in my patients' eyes was relief. It's over. The stress is over. The problem's solved. But it isn't always solved. And they, when somebody, and again, I can understand that when you run an abortion clinic, you see somebody come in, they get their abortion, they're out of there, and you may never see them again. When you do it, I wasn't running an abortion clinic. I was in a regular OBGYN office. These were my patients, and I kept on seeing them afterwards. And I could tell you numerous stories of women who would come in with all kinds of problems, infertility or all kinds of problems afterwards, who realized years later perhaps that they may have thrown away their only chance at having a child.
Women never get over their abortion. This has been shown time and time again. The pain of an abortion lives with women. Of course, now we have several avenues where women can receive, healing that direct them towards healing. But they really never get over it.
Coming up,
as an abortionist, you never made eye contact with patients. You don't want to see the pain and the anguish in your patient.
Thanks again for joining us. It's our hope and prayer you find this program inspiring, heartwarming, and motivating. Remember, quality programming like this is only possible when people who care become partners with us for life. Please become a partner by sending your gift through our secure website at facinglife.tv or call the phone number on your screen during normal business hours. We need you to succeed. Here's another way you can help. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the program and share your ideas for future topics or guests. The next generation is depending on us to give them the information they need to face life head on. We'll see you next week, and may God bless you.
An abortionist in Dayton, Ohio, wanted to find a new way to do the most common surgical procedure in America. So Martin Haskell developed partial birth abortion. Usually late in the pregnancy, a baby is partially removed from the mother's womb and his skull is punctured or crushed. Congress originally tried to ban this grotesque procedure, but the Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional. The court claimed that some mothers might actually need this type of abortion if their own health was at risk. But health doesn't just constitute a life or death situation. It can also include mental or emotional well-being. From a mental or emotional standpoint, I can't imagine a mother having a positive experience watching her unborn child have his head crushed.
what advice would you have for doctors who are currently doing abortions?
Doing what we do as abortionists, literally taking somebody's son or daughter and tearing them apart. It sounds awful, but turning them into hamburger has an effect on that patient. Obviously, it has an immediate effect on that child. That son or daughter has a purpose in life, and we've just destroyed that. It's going to have effects on that young lady and her partner, whether it's a husband or a boyfriend. It affects everyone around them. And we're the instruments by which that happens. And whether you realize it or not, it has a horrendous effect on you and your own family as well. Because that's certainly what we've learned over time.
As an abortionist, you never made eye contact with patients. You know, you don't want to see the pain and the anguish in your patient. So you do the job. You know, your head is down and you suctioning and all of that, but you never make eye contact with that patient because it may do something to you, to where you can really recognize the ugliness and the destruction that you're involved with.
There's so much language out there. This is just a fetus. It's a blob of cells. If you're pregnant, you are carrying your son or daughter. Your son or daughter is totally dependent on you, both now and in the future. Your son or daughter has a real purpose in life. God does not create junk. No matter what your circumstances, you can give your son or daughter something that no one else can give him or her. and that's the chance to live.
Both Dr. Levatino and Dr. Johnson say their faith has played a significant role in their healing. They are now bold witnesses on behalf of unborn babies and their parents. You too can be a witness on behalf of unborn children. To help, we'll send you a free lapel pin depicting the same size and detail of the feet of an unborn baby only 10 weeks after conception. Go to facinglife.tv today to receive yours free.